I met her with another man in a coffee shop. I went to their table and said, "It's over between us, you destroyed our family." She was desperate when she saw me there, with my hands shaking and my gaze fixed on the floor. The silence lasted less than a second, but it felt like an eternity as everyone around stopped to watch what came next. He, an ordinary man, one of those who go unnoticed, looked at me with such repulsive tranquility that it made me sick. It was as if he was used to this situation. As if he knew exactly how it would end. But no one in that place was prepared for what came next. Neither does she. Neither does he. Neither do I. And much less our children. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt. It was the plot, it was the plan, it was the conspiracy that existed behind every fake kiss, every long look, every "I'll be right back" said in a hurry at the door. It was the fact that I had been made a fool of so precisely that when I found out, I didn't feel anger at first, just a kind of anesthesia that covers the soul when it is torn from the body without warning. The kind of pain that doesn't bleed, but burns inside as if each memory were a blade. The kind of pain that paralyzes. She stood up from her chair as if her legs wouldn't obey her. Her words came out in sobs, "It's not what it seems, please, listen to what I have to say." But what could she say that would change the fact that she was caught with another man, on an ordinary day, in the middle of the afternoon, while I believed she was taking care of things around the house? What could she explain when my eyes had already seen everything they needed to see? He sat. That man. The lover. With a cynical smile hidden behind a glass of wine, as if this were a play and he was just fulfilling his role. He didn't apologize. He didn't get up. He didn't bother. He just watched, and that said a lot about who he was, and how much she had lost herself to be with someone like him. Cell phones were taken out, some people were recording, others were just whispering. A waiter approached, trying to contain the tension, asking if everything was okay, as if some kind of "yes" could come out of any of us. Our children were not there, but they became the center of what came next. Because, in a desperate attempt to justify the unjustifiable, she made the wrong choice. He tried to reverse the roles. Painted me as unstable. Like a controlling man. As someone who was no longer the same, who had become emotionally unbalanced, who needed help. She didn't know that I was listening to her conversation with her lawyer days before. I didn't know that I had read messages exchanged between the two. I had no idea that I had already discovered the plan. She intended to use the betrayal as an argument to take me away from my children, to convince a judge that I was emotionally incapable of taking care of them. That was what hurt the most. Not the stolen kiss in a cheap cafe. Not the touches under the table or the knowing smiles. But the fact that, out of all the choices she could make to be free, she chose to destroy the one thing I had always protected with all my strength, our family. I heard everything secretly. The messages. The connections. The meetings. The plan. The attempt to create a false narrative where I would be the villain. And when I saw that meeting happen, in that banal and commonplace, I knew it was time to act. Not for revenge. But for justice. "You destroyed our family," I repeated, this time looking into her eyes. And that's when she broke down. Not out of regret. But out of fear. Scared of what I knew. Scared of what I was about to do. Fear of the evidence I had already gathered. Fear of seeing the castle of lies crumble in front of everyone. Fear of scandal. Fear of children. Scared of herself. The coffee shop became a courtroom. Crossed glances. Silent judgments. No one there knew the whole story, but everyone could feel that this was more than a simple betrayal. And it was. She started shaking, trying to pull me aside, begging me not to say anything in front of people. "We can talk, please. I'll explain everything later, at home, not now." I didn't want to hear anything else. Because her every word, at that moment, was an insult to my intelligence, my memory, my history. And even so, I didn't make a fuss. I just handed over an envelope with all the prints, with the audio where she agreed with her lover the narrative she would use against me in court. And he said, in a firm voice, "Take this to your lawyer. And tell him that now, the fight will be fair." She fell to her knees, and for the first time I saw real desperation in her eyes. Not for marriage, but because I knew I had lost control. The lover finally stood up, but before he said anything, another man appeared in the cafeteria. He rushed in, sweaty, panting, and looked directly at her. "What's going on? Why is he here?" he asked. She turned pale. The lover was not the only one. The lie was even bigger than I imagined. And it all started to collapse there, in front of me. In front of everyone. Days later, our children found out. And their reaction was not hate. It was shock. Because she had told them that I was sick, that I needed psychological help, that I had been aggressive, unstable, paranoid. They heard it from her. And they saw something completely different from me. They sat with me, listened to my version, read the messages, saw the evidence. Their world turned upside down. Because the person who was supposed to protect them had also betrayed them, emotionally, morally, spiritually. And the cruelest thing, she used them as a shield to justify her infidelity. The betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. The real blow was how she would use adultery to destroy me legally, emotionally and family-wise. It was a plan devised over time, calmly, coldly. A plan where she needed me to react badly, to lose control, to confirm the role of an unbalanced man that she had been portraying in conversations and manipulated notes. But she was wrong. Because instead of freaking out, I was thorough. I was discreet. I collected evidence. I recorded everything. And at the right moment, I turned the tables. She lost joint custody. The lover lost his job after the formal complaint of unethical conduct, as he held a public position. Her reputation spread. Not because I wanted to, but because people around me started to connect the dots. Mutual friends, family, neighbors. Each of them watched the truth emerge like a volcano, and there was no argument that contained the lava. And still, I wasn't happy. Because all I wanted was love. Loyalty. True. And all I received was betrayal, manipulation and a silence that screams to this day when I think about the day I walked into that coffee shop. But there is something she never knew. Something that not even the lover knew. Something that no one, to this day, has imagined. Because, as much as she betrayed me with her body, her mind and even her children, there was a part of this story that no one has yet known. A twist that, when it comes to light, will completely change the way everything will be remembered. Because, behind her betrayal, there was something much deeper, and the way I discovered it was something that not even she would have had the courage to imagine. And that's why this story needs to be told to the end. Because the worst was yet to come. Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any type of betrayal. All stories told are fictitious, created to show how infidelity can destroy homes, hearts and entire lives. Our objective is clear, to provoke reflection, emotion and show the real consequences of thoughtless choices. Now take a deep breath. Get ready to hear a story shocking, intense and unforgettable. Press play. The drama will begin. Ethan and Olivia have always been the kind of couple who, at first glance, seem to have overcome every obstacle of modern love. They met when they were young, in a small bookstore, among the shelves of novels and psychology books, and what began as a shy conversation about Dostoevsky turned, as the months went by, into a growing and solid passion. He was a civil engineer, a pragmatic, methodical man, with a gentle manner and a reserved but accurate sense of humor. She, a clinical psychologist, had a sensitive soul, an always available ear, and the kind of presence that lit up any room. Together, they built a life based on values that they both considered unbreakable: trust, partnership, communication. When they got married, the world seemed to stop for a moment. The outdoor ceremony, surrounded by friends and family, was the perfect portrayal of the promise they made to each other, to walk side by side, no matter what. For many years, life as a couple was peaceful and surrounded by small routines that brought them closer together. Sunday mornings with coffee on the balcony, Friday nights watching the same movies over and over again, long hugs at the end of difficult days. Ethan used to bring flowers without a set date, just because he missed them in the middle of the workday. Olivia, in turn, left notes hidden in his shirt pockets, always with words of encouragement, love and affection. Their marriage wasn't perfect, none is, but it seemed to be made of an invisible glue that held them together even in the quietest moments. From the marriage came 2 children, Noah and Emily. The arrival of the children brought a new rhythm to the house, new responsibilities, and also challenges that tested the couple like never before. Olivia chose to reduce her patient load so she could be more present in their early childhood years, while Ethan increased his hours at work, taking on larger projects to ensure the family's stability. This division, although agreed with affection, slowly began to create a subtle distance between the two, a thin line that separated who they were becoming from the versions they were at the beginning. But there was still respect, there were still bedtime conversations, there was still that feeling of belonging, of home. The house where they lived was spacious, but not luxurious. She had been handpicked by Olivia, because of the light that came through the living room window in the late afternoon. Ethan had built a floor-to-ceiling wooden bookshelf in her office with his own hands and said it was his favorite gift he'd ever made in his entire life. Every detail inside carried memories, the children's drawings pasted on the refrigerator, the marks on the wall that measured their growth year by year, the sofa stained by a night of laughter and wine with friends. It was a home, truly. Not a scenario. And that was what made their daily lives so precious. Olivia was respected professionally, with an always full schedule and patience who admired her not only for her competence, but for the empathy with which she conducted each session. She heard pain every day and, somehow, this made her carry a constant weight in her chest, as if she were absorbing part of other people's suffering. Ethan was her safe haven, or so she used to say, and when the days seemed too heavy, he made her laugh with the dry and unexpected jokes that he had the gift of releasing at the right moment. They completed each other. Or at least that's what everyone around believed for years. Noah and Emily grew up healthy, smart, with distinct but equally charming personalities. He, more reserved, liked to read, build things, ask questions that were too complex for his age. She was expansive, creative, invented plays in the backyard and had the magical ability to turn any ordinary day into an adventure. Ethan and Olivia, as parents, strived to maintain harmony, to provide dialogue, presence, and love. There were family dinners with conversations about each person's day, trips to quiet places where they could be together without distractions, stormy nights watching old movies all covered by a single blanket. Over time, the relationship between Ethan and Olivia matured. What was once fiery passion turned into silent complicity. The kisses became rarer, but the looks still said a lot. They argued, like any couple, sometimes about small things, sometimes about bigger decisions. But there was always the feeling that, even in their differences, there was a greater commitment that united them. Ethan had this way of listening before speaking, of considering before reacting. Olivia, on the other hand, was sometimes driven by emotion, but she knew how to recognize her mistakes and was not afraid to backtrack when necessary. The years passed. Wedding anniversaries began to be celebrated with discreet dinners, sometimes at home, sometimes in a restaurant they had frequented since they were dating. Friends commented on how in sync they seemed, as if they understood each other with just a gesture or a look. And in fact, there was an intimate language between them, built with time and shared experiences. They had faced crises, like every couple, but they learned to become stronger through them. Or so they thought. Ethan's work required constant travel, visits to construction sites in other cities, meetings with investors, and Olivia, although she missed him at home, understood and supported him. She used these periods to take care of the house, dedicate herself to her children, and read the books she had on her bedside. He took advantage of the time to breathe, reorganize his thoughts, and take care of himself. When he returned, the reunions were warm, full of stories, laughter and, sometimes, nights of love with the urgency of someone who had been too far away. It was a delicate balance, but it seemed to work. Ethan trusted her with his eyes closed. He never questioned schedules, messages, commitments. He felt lucky to have a woman by his side who was so focused, so ethical, so present. Olivia, in turn, saw in him a man of integrity, hard work, who dedicated himself to his family with admirable dedication. They both believed they were safe with each other. But love, like everything that lives, needs to be watered. And sometimes, when silence settles in for too long, it begins to wither from the inside, even though the outward appearance remains lush. It's an invisible, slow, almost imperceptible process, until there's no turning back. In the midst of so many years together, between school dinners, bills to pay, accumulated fatigue and sleepless nights with childhood fever, small gaps began to open up. Nothing blatant. Just moments of unshared solitude. Unspoken thoughts. Swallowed desires. Ethan, increasingly immersed in work, started taking problems home, getting lost in spreadsheets on his cell phone even at the dinner table. Olivia, between appointments and maternal tasks, began to feel a type of emptiness that she couldn't name. And, like the good psychologist she was, she tried to understand, rationalize, redirect. But what is understood cannot always be resolved. Sometimes lucidity only magnifies the pain. And it was at that point that everything began to transform almost imperceptibly. The routine, once comfortable, began to feel like a prison. The conversations, once deep, became operational. Hugs lost their spontaneity, kisses became programmed. There was still love, perhaps, but it was dormant. And when something sleeps for too long, it runs the risk of never waking up again. The curious thing is that, even in this scenario, there were no constant fights, no aggressions, no disrespect. It was the silence that screamed. The absence of what once was. The empty spaces between the bodies on the bed. The lunches where everyone looked at their own plate. The Sundays that were once celebrated have become too long. And even so, the commitment remained firm. For the family. For the children. For the story. For what they were. For what they could still be, if they found themselves in the middle of that path again. Until, one afternoon, Ethan decided to surprise Olivia with something special. A simple gesture, but full of intention. He believed there was still time, that their love just needed to be awakened with kindness. Little did he know that time had already started counting backwards. And that something, much bigger than I imagined, was emerging behind my back. But it wasn't time to find out yet. It wasn't time to know yet. There was still time to believe. There was still light coming in through the living room window in the late afternoon. There was still hope. There was still a story to be told, even if its end was already being written in silence, line by line, by hands that one day promised to never let go of his. In recent months, Ethan's life has walked a fine line between custom and the expectation of change. The routine at home seemed intact at first glance, but there were small details that made him uneasy, the way Olivia silently distracted herself in the middle of conversations that previously interested her, the smiles that seemed absent even when her face was drawing them mechanically, the way she avoided his eyes whenever he asked something more intimate, as if she were hiding some answer that hurt. Still, he sought to ignore these signs. She attributed it all to tiredness, the demands of her children, the pressure of her work. I didn't want to believe that something was being lost, I preferred to believe that everything was a passing phase. I had faith in time, in memories, and in the bond they built with so much dedication. He was planning a short trip for the two of them, something simple, without children, so they could reconnect, rediscover themselves. He silently saved money and tried to coordinate his increasingly busy schedules. But at the same time, there was a hole growing inside him. A discomfort that I couldn't name. What was once peaceful love was now fraught with anxiety and insecurity. Ethan began to notice that Olivia was more present on her cell phone, more absent in conversations, less enthusiastic about any attempt to get closer. And when I tried to confront this, she dodged with soft explanations that didn't answer anything. She said she was overwhelmed, that the patients demanded a lot, that she needed a little more space. And he, not knowing what to do, gave in. Because he loved it. Because I believed. The nights became quieter. The ringing decreased. The answers were short. Olivia spent more time away from home, claiming professional commitments that Ethan had no way of contesting. When he returned, he came with the same calm smile, the same restrained kindness, but with a different, almost distant energy. She spoke fondly of her children, asked about his work projects, but avoided any deeper topics. Ethan, confused, was torn between the hope that this would pass and the fear that he was facing something he didn't want to see. He began to notice that she was slow to respond to messages when she was away, that sometimes she would disappear for hours and then come up with explanations that were too ready, too convincing. And the more he tried to find logic, the more intuition stirred inside him, screaming. One night, while organizing documents on his computer, Ethan stumbled upon a mirrored notification from her cell phone on the app they used to share their family calendar. It was a conversation. Quick. Fragmented. But enough to leave a bitter taste in your throat. "Today was better than yesterday," said one message, followed by a heart emoji. He stopped. Reread. He tried to find a plausible context. But the contact name was not known, it did not belong to any patient, friend or coworker. It was a masculine, informal name. And the worst part, Olivia's response was right below. "Tomorrow, in the same place," accompanied by a provocative gif. Ethan didn't react. He stood there, with his eyes fixed on the screen, feeling his hands sweat and his chest tighten. He didn't speak to her that night. Not even the next one. He began to observe more, with the caution of someone who didn't want to make mistakes. He began to put together a puzzle that hurt with each piece fitted together. The absent smiles, the new clothes for no apparent reason, the more careful makeup on days when she said she had appointments outside, the rush to leave the house. He needed proof. I didn't want to accuse without certainty. I didn't want to destroy what was left without irrefutable confirmation. He hired a private detective, overcoming pride, overcoming shame. It was the hardest decision he'd ever made, but at that point, the doubt was too unbearable to ignore. While waiting for the investigation to return, Ethan tried to keep the facade intact. He played with his children, fulfilled his obligations, kissed Olivia on the forehead when leaving the house. But inside, a silent war was tearing him apart. I slept poorly, ate little, my heart beat at an out-of-control rhythm with each notification on my cell phone. And then, after days of waiting, the phone rang. The detective's voice was neutral, but the content was devastating. There were photos. Videos. Reports. Dates. Schedules. Locations. Olivia wasn't just having an affair, she was having frequent encounters with a man who looked familiar but who Ethan still couldn't clearly identify in the blurry images from outside cameras. What destroyed him most wasn't seeing the two of them together in a restaurant, or leaving a hotel hand in hand. It was seeing her smile. That light, enchanted smile that he hadn't seen at home in years. She smiled as if she were in love. Ethan fell into a silent abyss. He spent an entire night locked in the office, staring into space. My stomach was churning, my head was hurting. He felt deceived, used, discarded. Their entire history seemed to have been tainted by something he didn't know how to combat. And at the same time, he felt ashamed of himself. Because I didn't realize it before. For being naive. For still loving. When morning came, Olivia appeared at the door with a cup of coffee, as she sometimes did. He faked a smile and thanked her. She looked at him for a few seconds and, without saying anything, walked away. The image of her walking away, so serene, so comfortable in that lie, gave him goosebumps. Over the next few days, Ethan mustered the courage to confront her. But he decided he wouldn't do it at home, or in front of his children. He arranged a lunch in a neutral place, said he wanted to talk about the relationship, about them. Olivia accepted it as naturally as ever. On the appointed day, he arrived early. He sat with his back to the door so she wouldn't see him straight away. I needed to watch her enter. I needed to feel the impact of the lie approaching. When she arrived, alone, wearing one of the new dresses he already knew, Ethan took a deep breath. She greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, asked him about work, smiled as if nothing was wrong. He let her speak, waited for the dish to arrive, and then pulled out the envelope with the photos. He placed it on the table without saying a word. The silence between the two weighed more than any scream. Olivia looked at the images, one by one, with her hands shaking, her eyes teary. But he didn't cry. And when she raised her face to look at him, there was a mixture of fear and relief in her eyes. She tried to explain, starting with vague words, saying that she was confused, that she didn't want to hurt him, that everything had happened unexpectedly. Ethan just watched her. I didn't want to hear excuses, I wanted the truth. And then, she spoke the man's name. And that name, it was like a blade entering his chest. Because now he knew exactly who he was. Still, he didn't scream. He didn't get up. Nothing broke. He just said that she should go home, that the conversation was over there. She hesitated, but went. He remained in the restaurant for long minutes, in shock. The image of her walking to the door, her hair loose, her steps light, was the same as on so many other days. But now, everything had changed. The world was no longer the same. And neither would he be. When he got home, he went straight up to his room. He closed the door. And he stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to understand when their lives had veered down this path. But what Ethan still didn't know was that there was something behind this betrayal. Something much deeper. Much more cruel. Something that couldn't be explained with passion, lack or slippage. Something that had been designed coldly. And that involved his own children. A truth hidden behind every kiss, every excuse, every absence. And that truth was about to come to light. And when that happened, nothing would be the same again. Nothing. Ethan spent days in a state of emotional suspension, a kind of internal survival in which feelings were contained but not tamed. Since the day of the restaurant confrontation, Olivia had locked herself into an uneasy silence. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I didn't cry, I didn't look for justifications. He just continued to exist inside the house, which had now become a minefield of memories, with his silent steps through the corridors, as if avoiding disturbing other people's pain. Noah and Emily noticed that something had changed. The father seemed more distant, although he continued to be present in his routines. The mother avoided prolonged family meetings, responded with mechanical kindness and lost herself in long walks or hours isolated in the office where she no longer produced anything. The heaviness hung in the air, and no one knew quite what to name it. Deep down, Ethan felt like something was still being hidden. The betrayal had devastated him, but there was a restlessness that went beyond the pain of adultery. It was as if infidelity was just the surface of a much deeper ocean, an ocean he was now determined to explore. She went through old files, emails, deleted messages, cloud rescues, recordings from forgotten security cameras in her office. He no longer sought confirmation of the betrayal, he sought to understand why. And then, one cold morning, among corrupted digital folders and forgotten backups, he found a voice audio sent by Olivia to someone he didn't know. Her voice was low but clear, and the recording left no room for doubt. She said she needed to make sure the reports were ready, because in the court case she would allege that Ethan suffered from episodes of emotional aggression, and that the clinical records would try to prove this consistently. He listened to it in silence, lying on the cold floor of the office, with his eyes fixed on the ceiling, feeling as if her every word was a nail driven into his spine. The next day, he took the audio to a lawyer. It wasn't just a case of betrayal. It was a plan. An attempt to destroy an image, a strategy to take custody of the children, supported by forged documentation, dubious testimonies and manipulated reports. Olivia intended, with the support of the man she cheated on him with, who he now knew was a former college classmate of hers, also a psychologist, to build a solid case to claim that Ethan was emotionally unstable, that he put his children at risk, and that he should therefore be removed from custody. She had already started conversations with a lawyer specializing in sole custody. Her lover, in turn, was part of a group of professionals who provided advice on complex family disputes. The plan was perfect. And it would have worked, if Ethan hadn't discovered the betrayal before the final execution. Without hesitation, he asked his legal team to deepen the investigation. The evidence piled up. There were exchanges of messages between Olivia and her lover detailing dates, strategies of emotional provocation, edited records of old sessions with patients, used as a basis for assigning Ethan an altered psychological profile. There were also draft petitions already prepared, with the names of witnesses recruited from manipulable acquaintances. It was a scam. And it wasn't just a blow against love. It was a blow against fatherhood, against family memory, against everything he had built. The night he decided to confront her, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat at the living room table and waited. Olivia arrived late, like the last few days. She placed her bag on the chair, adjusted her hair in the entrance mirror, but when she saw her husband sitting silently, with the documents in front of him, she froze. He asked her to sit down. She hesitated. He asked if everything was okay, trying to maintain his composure. Ethan slid the folder over to her. He just said he knew everything. And now was the time to listen. Olivia opened the papers with shaking hands. He read the prints, listened to the audio on his cell phone, looked at the purchased witness signatures. Her expression crumbled like a cracked glass mask. He started babbling that it wasn't quite like that, that things had gotten out of control, that he never intended to take it any further. Ethan didn't raise his voice. You just asked why. Why is that? Why destroy a loving father? Why lie to your children? Why hand over your own husband into the hands of a manipulable judicial system? She began to cry, but her tears were not of regret. It was a failure. Scared of being discovered. She tried to justify it by saying that she felt erased, diminished, that Ethan was so correct that he made her feel suffocated, as if she lived in the shadow of a perfection that she couldn't keep up with. She said that, with her lover, she felt valued, understood, and that he had suggested the strategy only as a safety plan, in case she decided to separate. Ethan asked if his children were involved. She said no. But he hesitated. And it was that second of hesitation that completely destroyed him. Because Ethan could read Olivia. I knew that when she looked away before answering, it was because there was something more. And he insisted. Pressed. Until she gave in. He confessed that he had already started to plant small ideas in his children. Subtle comments about the father's behavior, insinuations about his coldness, his excessive control, his lack of patience. He said he didn't want to harm him, just to make things easier if the plan went ahead. Ethan stood up from his chair with his hands shaking, his eyes burning, and for the first time in history, he felt hatred. Not because of what she did to him. But for what he tried to do to the children. Olivia burst into tears. He begged for forgiveness. He said he still loved him, that he had lost himself. But he didn't respond. He took the envelope with the documents, went up the stairs and went to his children's room. He knocked on the door. He sat with them. He said, in a firm voice, that something very serious had happened. He didn't go into details, but he explained that, for a while, they would live with him, that things would change. Noah, now a teenager, looked at his father with teary eyes and said he always knew something was wrong. Emily, smaller, just hugged him, tightening her arms around his neck as if trying to hold on to someone who was about to disappear. The next morning, Olivia wasn't home. He left a letter. He said he needed time to think. Ethan didn't look for her. He took the children to a new apartment, began the legal procedures, filed a request for full custody, based on psychological manipulation and attempted judicial fraud. I had proof. There were witnesses. It had the truth. But there was no more peace. And he knew that, even though he won, he would come out of it all a broken man. Trust, complicity, dreams, everything had been devastated. And yet, something inside him refused to die. Something still pulsed. A need to start over. To rebuild. Not for Olivia. But for the children. For himself. For the dignity that, even scratched, still supported him. But nothing would prepare him for what was yet to come. Because the lover, until then silent, had not yet played his last card. And what he was about to do would transform the entire story. Again. In a way that no one would have been able to predict. There were weeks of emotional restructuring, signed documents, court calls and sleepless nights. Ethan managed to move away from the setting he previously called home and began a new routine with his children in a smaller but lively apartment. The wound was still bleeding, but there was a certain relief in being away from the environment where everything had been so cruelly dismantled. The kids adapted better than he expected, mainly because Ethan chose not to flood them with resentment. He didn't attack Olivia in her absence, he just said that certain decisions had been necessary. He protected his children from emotional dirt, even if it cost him immense effort. He started getting up earlier, preparing breakfast, taking Emily to school, picking up Noah from training. She found a new type of purpose in her routine with her children, something that gave her back some dignity. However, no matter how much she tried to move forward, there was still a loose end to this story, an uncomfortable silence that came from the other side, from the man Olivia had chosen to share her betrayal and engineer her ruin. His name was Lucas, an old acquaintance from Olivia's academic past. She had mentioned him vaguely years ago, as a colleague in an elective course, someone with whom she had shared research projects, but of no real importance. They had never maintained visible ties after college, at least not officially. Discovering that he was the lover had already been a shock, but knowing that he had actively participated in the plan to destroy Ethan's image as a father was something that still deeply bothered him. Lucas's involvement went beyond passion, he was technical, rational, meticulous. Ethan wanted to understand why. What motivated a man to get involved in something so perverse and premeditated? Was it just desire for Olivia? Or was there something darker behind that calculating stance? It was on a gray Thursday afternoon, while picking up Emily from music class, that Ethan received a call from an unknown number. He answered the speakerphone, expecting it to be something trivial, but on the other end, the voice came low and direct. It was Lucas. He asked to meet. He said he needed to talk, that there were things Ethan needed to know. The tone was not threatening. He sounded tired, almost broken. Ethan hesitated. On the one hand, I didn't want any more contact with that name, that shadow. On the other, something in Lucas's voice indicated that there was something behind everything, something that Olivia would never reveal. The meeting was arranged in a discreet cafe, in a distant neighborhood. Ethan arrived first and sat at a table in the back. When Lucas appeared, he looked haggard, with his face more aged than he remembered in the images he saw. He was thin, with sunken eyes and a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. He sat in silence, as if he didn't know where to start. Ethan, in turn, didn't show anger. I watched. I was there for answers. Lucas took a deep breath, rested his elbows on the table and began to speak, in a firm, blunt tone. He said that the relationship with Olivia had started months before, but that from the beginning she had made it clear that it was not just an emotional involvement. There was a concrete proposal, manipulate evidence to claim Ethan's emotional incapacity, and thus guarantee full custody of the children. In return, Olivia promised a new life for the two, financial support and even opening a clinic together, using part of the money from the separation. Lucas hesitated for a while, but according to him, it wasn't out of ambition that he accepted, but rather out of an old debt to Olivia, an emotional debt that Ethan still didn't understand. Ethan remained silent, waiting. It was then that Lucas, with his voice breaking, revealed the point that would change everything. He said that years earlier, during a college internship, Olivia had been accused of manipulating clinical results of a teenage patient who ended up committing suicide. The case was hushed up by the university, but Lucas, an intern with her at the time, was the only one who knew what had really happened. Olivia, afraid of being exposed, begged him to take some of the blame, which compromised his career and caused him to be rejected by other institutions for years. He did it, out of passion. And it was never reciprocated. When he met her again, years later, she used this past as emotional blackmail. He said that now they could start over, and that this was their chance to win together. Ethan listened, perplexed. The woman with whom he shared almost half his life had a past he had never imagined. A woman capable of manipulating an entire system, of protecting herself at the expense of an innocent person, and who now repeated the same patterns, but with her own family. She asked if Lucas was still involved with her. Lucas laughed, a dry, bitter laugh. He said it had been scrapped as soon as the plan began to fall apart. Olivia was already in a relationship with another man, a lawyer who was a friend of her former lover, and was already developing a new strategy to turn the legal situation around to her advantage. He said he reached out to Ethan because he didn't want to carry this anymore. That he could no longer bear the guilt, nor the fear, nor the emptiness he felt when he saw himself as an accomplice to someone so destructive. It was then that Lucas handed over a flash drive. He said that it contained recordings of simulated sessions, files manipulated by Olivia with his help, false records that would be used against Ethan. He said that with that, he could not only guarantee custody of the children, but also prevent Olivia from practicing her profession for years. Ethan took the flash drive without saying anything. He felt as if he were in a nightmare. He got up, looked at Lucas for a long moment and just said that he hoped he would do something useful with his life after that. That night, back at the apartment, Ethan didn't sleep. Watched the recordings. He read the forged reports. He confirmed every detail with an expert appointed by his lawyer. The next day, he handed everything over to the competent authorities, including the Psychology Ethics Board. The investigation was quick. The reports were scathing. Olivia was preventively suspended, and formal proceedings were initiated. The case took on unexpected proportions. She was called to testify, lost contracts with clinics, and had her image damaged. He tried to defend himself, saying he was the victim of a frame-up, but the evidence spoke for itself. The children gradually found out. Ethan cautiously explained that his mother had made serious mistakes and now needed to face the consequences. Noah reacted with silence and distance. Emily cried for nights, but little by little she understood. Ethan never forced them to hate her, but he made it clear that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, if it ever can. Olivia tried to contact him several times. He sent messages, letters, recorded audios begging for a conversation, for a chance to explain himself. Ethan didn't respond. There was a tiredness within him that no longer allowed negotiations. Her words, which had once been a safe haven, were now nothing more than ruins. Spring has arrived, bringing with it a light breeze and a calmer pace to life. Ethan, for the first time in months, felt like he could breathe. He resumed his work projects, went back to running on Sundays, and started occasionally going out with his children to new places. It was one of those afternoons when, while accompanying Emily to a literary fair at school, he met Julia, the mother of one of her daughter's classmates, a history teacher, with kind eyes and a smile that seemed sincere. There was no immediate interest, no promises, no exchange of contacts on the same day. But there was pleasant conversation, a feeling of lightness that Ethan had forgotten existed. In the days that followed, they met again casually. They discovered affinities, exchanges of ideas, similar reflections on the world. Julia didn't ask invasive questions, nor did she try to speed anything up. It was presence. It was listening. And this was, little by little, giving Ethan back something he no longer expected to feel, tranquility. For the first time in a long time, he laughed without guilt. He felt seen. Not like a hurt father or a betrayed man, but as someone possible to love again. While Olivia faced the consequences of her actions, removed from her profession, under trial, Ethan silently rebuilt his own version of happiness. A happiness without euphoria, but with roots. A happiness without an audience, but with truth. He knew there was still a lot to heal. But now, looking at his children sleeping peacefully and feeling Julia at his side on a light late afternoon walk, he could safely say that he had survived. And, more than that, he had won. Because those who choose to remain honest, even after being devastated, are already one step ahead of those who lie to themselves and the world. The following months followed like a long journey between rubble and reconstruction, with Ethan relearning to exist in a world where certainties had completely collapsed. There were days when the silence of the new house comforted him, like a thin blanket that protected without suffocating, and others when the absence of familiar noises hurt like the memory of a forgotten song. The routine with his children remained steady, but he no longer needed to make an effort to look good. Little by little, his tired face gave way to a new serenity, matured by suffering in time. Emily slept more peacefully, and Noah began to regain trust in his father, especially when he realized that there was no lie or disguise in his words. Ethan made a point of being clear, without going into explanations that the children didn't yet need to carry out, but also without hiding that there were deep wounds that would require time and care. Julia began to occupy a delicate, almost imperceptible, but real space. Her presence was subtle, respectful, never imposed. They talked often, exchanged books, walked with the children, sometimes watched movies that ended in long comfortable silences. There were no labels, and that was good. Ethan wasn't ready for new love, but he also didn't want to close himself off to the possibility that life could still offer him something beautiful. Julia understood her limits and never pushed them. She had her own traumas, her own concerns, and perhaps that's why the two understood each other easily. She listened more than she spoke, and when she said something, she said it with the precision of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Olivia was facing the consequences of what she had planted. The suspension of his professional license was just one layer of the collapse he now faced. He lost old patients, saw his name circulated in professional forums with suspicion, faced ethical and civic investigations that could last for years. The support he expected to receive from colleagues and former allies did not come. Some walked away silently, others were openly critical. She now lived alone in a small, simple rented apartment, far from the neighborhood where she raised her children, far from the life she had helped to destroy. And yet, Olivia still clung to a fragile illusion of reversal. He wrote letters that he never delivered, reviewed audios before deleting them, prepared defenses that deep down he knew would not convince anyone else. It was no longer the court that mattered to him, it was his conscience, which now gave him no peace. It was on an October morning, when the winds were beginning to change and the leaves were coloring the sidewalks, that Olivia reached out to Ethan directly for the first time since everything exploded. He sent a short message, without explanation, just asking to see him. He didn't insist, he didn't appeal. It just planted the seed of a date he might or might not accept. Ethan read the message and left his cell phone on the table for almost 2 hours, unable to decide what he felt. The anger was no longer as hot as before, but the hurt still pulsed. And there was, above all, an ethical conflict within him. Part wanted to hear what she had to say, part feared that any contact would reopen wounds that were beginning to heal. After a long day of work in silence, he responded with only a time and a public place. If she wanted to talk, let it be in broad daylight and among strangers. The meeting took place in an inconspicuous park. Olivia arrived punctually, visibly thinner, with her face marked by bad nights of sleep. She wore simple but clean clothes, with her hair tied up carelessly. Ethan, on the other side of the bench, maintained his calm tone. There were no hugs, no warm greetings. Just two adults trying to pick up the pieces of what was once a whole story. Olivia began speaking in a low voice, bluntly. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, nor understanding. That he didn't want to justify the unjustifiable, but he needed to say out loud that he now saw himself more clearly. She told how she began to feel nullified within her own marriage, how she didn't know how to ask for help, how she lost herself trying to prove to herself that she was still desirable, strong, important. She said that she found an escape valve in Lucas, but that she soon realized that it was a trap, and still continued forward, trapped in the illusion that she would be able to escape unharmed. She said she thought about destroying Ethan not out of hatred, but because it was easier to make him the villain than to admit that she herself had failed as a woman, as a mother, as a professional. Ethan listened attentively, but with no apparent emotion. When she finished, there was a long silence. He didn't say he understood her. I didn't even say I hated her. He just said that she had made choices and that now she would have to face their consequences. She said that her children were fine, but that their time with her would need to be built with patience and responsibility. He said that, from that moment on, he would only act based on the well-being of the children, and that there would be no more room for manipulations, empty promises, or attempts to rewrite history. Olivia nodded with a lump in her throat, thanked her for her time, and stood up. Before leaving, he asked if there was still anything he could do. Ethan responded that she could start by being truthful with her own children. Tell them, honestly, what happened. Not to redeem themselves, but to at least give them the dignity of knowing the truth. She nodded and walked away, her steps slow, almost dragging, like someone carrying her own judgment on her shoulders. Over the next few days, Olivia searched for Noah and Emily. They arranged separate meetings, with Ethan's consent. The conversations were difficult. Noah, although polite, maintained a distant, skeptical stance, asking tough questions and demanding direct answers. Olivia tried not to defend herself, just acknowledge it. Emily cried a lot, but asked for time, said she needed to think. There was no immediate reconciliation, nor emotional hugs. But there was something more valuable, the first crack in the wall of lies. For the first time since it all began, Olivia chose not to hide, not to distort, not to run away. And even if it didn't erase what he did, it was a starting point for something more honest. Ethan, in turn, delved deeper and deeper into his new life. He began teaching classes as a guest at a local university, an activity he had always dreamed of but never had time to pursue. Contact with students brought him a feeling of renewal, a reminder that there was still value in his experience, in his story. He talked about engineering, but also about ethics, responsibility, and how technical decisions can change lives. And little by little, his voice regained its firmness, his posture returned to align with the man he always was. Julia stood by, not in a hurry, but present. She got to know Ethan's children little by little, respecting each one's spaces and rhythms. Emily liked her almost immediately, attracted by the caring manner and natural creativity of someone who taught children every day. Noah was more reserved, but little by little he allowed himself to accept her presence, especially when he realized that Julia wasn't trying to occupy any place, just be. Ethan watched all this with a mixture of relief and fear. I felt that something good was being built, but I carried the scar of someone who has already lost everything once. And then the invitation came. A dinner at Julia's house with some of her friends, professional colleagues, people he hadn't met yet. It was the first time he would be introduced as someone important in her life. The invitation scared him, not because of the event itself, but because of the symbolic weight it carried. Accepting meant opening a new door, making yourself available for a new narrative. He hesitated for a moment, but when he looked at his daughter sleeping on the couch, with a book on her lap and a smile on her face, he knew he didn't need to run away anymore. He replied that yes, I would go. And this time, without ghosts behind the eyes. That night, as he was getting dressed, he looked in the mirror and saw himself different. No longer as a broken man, but as someone who had endured. Survived. And now, it started again. The past would still be there, somewhere in memory. But not as weight. As a witness. And perhaps, after all, that was the greatest triumph anyone could achieve. Dinner at Julia's house, which had begun with the slight discomfort of someone stepping into new territory, ended with a serene silence between laughter, low music and the clink of cutlery collected late at night. Ethan, sitting next to her on the couch in the small living room decorated with old books and childhood photos of her son, felt for the first time in a long time that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He was just himself there. Not the betrayed man, not the father in dispute, not the wronged professional. It was just a man, whole, present, with marks on his chest, but with clean hands. Julia didn't need to make speeches to show that she was happy. The way she looked at him was enough, how she laughed when he spoke, how she approached Emily without invading, how she respected Noah's silence without trying to force him into any type of connection. Love, for Ethan, was no longer a promise on top of an altar, but a delicate and slow construction, made of respect and conscious choices. On the other side of the city, Olivia faced the final consequences of everything she planted. The Ethics Council's decision was harsh, but inevitable: definitive suspension of the license to practice psychology for an indefinite period, loss of professional credibility and the inclusion of his name on alert lists for unethical conduct. The clinics with which it still maintained ties cut ties, and the few remaining patients cancelled their appointments when they discovered the history of the process. Financially shaken, emotionally isolated, and with her own family divided, Olivia found herself at a breaking point, where it was no longer possible to maintain masks or subterfuge. For a few months, he tried to rebuild his image on social media, writing vague texts about self-knowledge and forgiveness, but the response was silence. The words lost strength, because now they came from someone who no longer held any authority. She moved again, to a smaller city, far from the eyes that still judged her. He works as an attendant in a neighborhood bookstore, far from the prestige he once sought, far from the feeling of control he previously cultivated as a defense against his own insecurity. The children, although they maintain contact, still visit her cautiously. Emily writes letters, sends short messages, but avoids long conversations. Noah, more firmly, maintains a protective distance. Olivia understands. For once, don't try to rush the repair. Understand that trust, when broken, does not come back with requests, it needs time, consistency, and the absence of expectations. On her most lonely days, she remembers the sound of Ethan laughing with the children, the smell of the coffee he prepared on Sundays, the warmth of the room lit by the morning sun. He knows he will never go back to that place again. But more than that, she knows she lost not the man, but herself. Lucas, in turn, disappeared from the radar. After delivering the evidence and collaborating with the investigations, he broke all ties with Olivia and moved to another region, seeking anonymity. He abandoned the field of psychology, opened a small coffee shop and lives discreetly, trying to find a new purpose in a life that he himself distorted. He carries the guilt like an internal tattoo, but he found in the simplicity of a new routine a possibility of silent redemption. He never looked for Ethan again, nor did he try to justify his actions. He understood that certain choices do not admit of explanation. Just consequences. As for Ethan, his life has found a new rhythm. The children grew, matured, and over time, understood in depth everything that happened. Noah entered university, studying social sciences, motivated by a genuine desire to understand human behavior and help others not go through what he went through. Emily, already a teenager, became passionate about music and psychology, but with a critical view of ethics and emotional responsibility. The two built a strong bond with their father, a silent and powerful bond, fueled by presence, constancy and truth. Ethan never imposed his version of events on them. He just lived their truth with serenity and gave them, over time, the freedom to form their own opinions. Julia, little by little, became more than a friendly presence. Became a partner. Together they built a new house, simple, welcoming, where every wall holds a recent history, without the weight of previous memories. There was no rush to get married again, nor were there any grandiose promises. Just the daily decision to continue together, to listen to each other, to share joys and pains with the lightness of someone who has already understood that love is not a trophy, but a constant choice. Ethan has found peace again. Not in the idealized way that you once dreamed of, but in the real, imperfect and true way that only comes after going through hell with dignity. What remains of this story is the certainty that betrayal is not just a breach of emotional commitment. It's a deep crack in the mirror of trust, it's a shattering of the image of who we thought we knew, and it's also a cruel test of our own identity. Ethan survived all of this not through luck, but through courage. Because he chose not to return hate with more hate, nor to hide under the cloak of victimization. He chose to remain firm, intact, true to himself, even when everything around him was falling apart. Olivia lives today with the weight of her choices. She is not a caricatured villain, but a woman who lost her way, who hid in excuses, who ran away from herself. And for that reason, his story is also a warning. The evil we deliberately choose to do doesn't go away with excuses, it comes back. He charges. It shapes future paths. And when we are not honest with those around us, we end up being devoured by the lie we create to protect our own failures. If you've come this far, with your heart racing, your eyes teary or simply pensive, write in the comments what you thought of this story. Do you think Ethan did the right thing? Do you think Olivia deserved another chance? Or are there mistakes that cost us everything? Your opinion is very important to us, share what you think. And of course, if you like stories like this, intense, real, full of emotions and learning, subscribe to the channel right now. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal. Our commitment is to show, through fiction, how infidelity can destroy lives, relationships and even those who practice it. Thanks for listening until the end. Until the next story.